Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Nedna. This week is an interview episode with Rob Hart. Yeah, I wanted to play into that a little bit, but you know what? It's just cool enough that we have Rob on. Rob's forthcoming novel will be out about a week from when you're listening to this. It's called The Warehouse, in case you live under a rock and haven't heard of it. So we're going to have Rob on. We're going to talk a little bit about The Warehouse, and then you can come back next week for our actual review of The Warehouse.
Yeah, I think this is a first for us, which I'll have to mark in my little database, where we're actually interviewing the author before we record our review. I don't think we've done that before.
We haven't, but we've read the book. But we still haven't interviewed him before we read them. So
yeah, we were still prepared. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So 2 weeks of Rob Hart for you guys. This week, interview. Next week, book review. And that's it. Let's talk to Rob.
Rob, thanks so much for coming back on and talking to us on Booked. It's been too long, but it's always great to talk to you, so thanks.
Yeah, as always. Thank you for having me.
Hey, so we haven't had a chance to tell the listeners about The Warehouse yet, so how about you do a little bit of that?
Sure. I think the easiest way to describe it is it's basically like 1984, but instead of big government, it's big business. But it imagines that one company, a totally fake company, I made it up completely from my imagination. It's not based on anything. One company completely takes over the American retail economy. And they build these facilities that are basically live-work facilities, kind of like Foxconn has in Asia. And so you don't just work there, you also live there in dormitory housing. So, you basically never go home anymore. And the book follows three characters. The CEO, who announces that he's dying, which is like the first line of the book, so that's not a spoiler. But it's this really big it's this big game change to the economy, because he's like this messianic figure who's suddenly, not going to be with the world anymore. And then two people who actually work inside the facility, a security guard whose business was ruined by this large corporation called Cloud, and a woman who is a corporate spy who is hired to sort of suss some things out about the company.
Understanding that it's a completely made up company.
Yes, not based on a real company.
There's a great part in where you have a dedication, and then back in your acknowledgments, you kind of expand on that a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about where the dedication comes from?
Yeah. So I dedicated the book to a woman named Maria Fernandez, and I never met Maria. There's this incredible story about her in the New York Times that I've read so many times at this point, I practically have it memorized. But so Maria worked at 3 Dunkin' Donuts locations part-time, presumably so none of them would have to give her benefits. And she would drive between the 3 locations, and she would sleep in her car. And in 2014, during one of those times, she was sleeping behind a gas station in her car, and a gas can overturned, and she suffocated. And, she was struggling to pay $550 a month on a basement apartment in Newark. And that same year, the CEO of Dunkin' Donuts earned $10 million. And look, none of us would say no to $10 million, right? I mean, it's a lot of money, but no one needs $10 million to survive. No one needs to earn $10 million in 1 year. I don't care how fucking talented you are. I don't care how much you raise the company's profits. Because at the end of the day, the cost of that compensation was Maria having to sleep in her car. And that story really, really stuck with me as I was writing it, because, and it talks about in the Times story about how there was this homeless guy who hung out around one of the Dunkin' Donuts where she worked, and she would give him money and she would give him food. And he showed up to her funeral to pay his respects. I bet the CEO of Dunkin' Donuts didn't fucking show up, And it's like, and for what? Like his $10 million, what did that buy him? Like his 12th vacation home? Good for him, I've always kind of had a dim view of capitalism, but writing this book sort of set me off a little bit. And Maria's story stuck with me so strongly that when it came time to do the dedication, I was like, oh, yeah, no, it's got to be to her.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
I was not familiar with it until the afterword. I saw the dedication. I saw a name. I didn't know if this was a cousin or close friend of yours, so when I read it afterwards, especially after having read the book, it takes on kind of a whole different meaning. So dedications, you basically get, maybe one or two per book. And I think yours was pretty well placed.
I mean, I also had the luxury of it's my seventh book, and I've already dedicated to like my parents and my wife and my daughter and my publisher and my agent. And, I just, to be perfectly honest, I was almost a little conflicted on it because I don't want to make it seem like I'm co-opting her story. But I do think her story is important. And I think it's the kind of story that can easily get lost in the shuffle. So, I mean, if even a few people see the dedication, read the acknowledgments and who she was, and then just look into her life a little bit and like find that Times article, I'd be really happy to find that out.
All right, we've covered that. Clearly, this is a work of fiction that was created ultimately in your imagination, based on no reality whatsoever. But
None.
has there been any pushback from anybody that might have confused this company with any current companies?
No. Yeah, we're playing a bit of a game here where it's like, it's the same reason that I thought the book was kind of unpublishable, because it's critical of Amazon's business model. It's what people keep on bringing up when we talk about the book. They're like, oh, cloud is based on Amazon. And the thing that I'm trying to underscore is that Amazon is not the disease, it's a symptom. It's a much bigger problem when you look at Walmart and Facebook and Google and Apple and basically every major corporation in America is like pretty bad. We've reached the point where it's really difficult to have any kind of ethical consumption under capitalism anymore. And so, it's easy to sort of call it the Amazon book, but I think the problem is sort of much bigger than that. And really, in terms of pushback, no, there hasn't been anyone who's been like, oh no, you can't do this. Like, I thought people were not going to be interested. We almost went to auction on the book, and we ended up selling it in a preempt, which is basically Crown at Random House was like, here is a giant pile of money. We're not having an auction. We want this fucking book. And that is not even close to what I expected was going to happen.
And so in preparation for talking to you, obviously one of the things that I was thinking about and having finished the book and stuff is like how easy it is to, correlate it to specifically Amazon. But I think throughout the book, and without spoiling anything, you did a pretty good job of giving characteristics and traits of obviously big tech companies, like you mentioned before, and really kind of making it a what if company as well. So I guess it would be reductive to say like this is a direct take on Amazon, because I feel, having read it, that you did a pretty good job of sharing the love with all of the evil corporations.
Well, I mean, frankly, a lot of my research was into Walmart because Amazon has not been around for that long. They're a very secretive company, so it's hard to get information out of them. And Walmart's been around since the 1960s. And there's been several really good books written about their rise and their business model. And so that was like my grounding. Like, that's where I got the majority of my intel for this book. And then, everything else was kind of just like reading the news.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, you kind of touched on research, which is something we wanted to talk about. So I'm going to move it up the list a little bit. So clearly you've addressed that Walmart was one of the kind of models that you studied for this. The book takes place like in the, I'll say, near future. And without spoiling anything, how much, how do I say this? Like, how much scientific accuracy is in some of the things? So clearly there are things that exist in this book that don't necessarily exist in wide use today.
That was so that was interesting. There's a bit at the end that sort of like crosses that chasm into like really speculative sci-fi. But other than that, my instinct always was, whenever I felt like things were getting too techy, was to scale back. Like for example, everyone at this facility wears a tracking watch, and the tracking watch's job is to sort of, monitor your health and send you in the right direction and help you do your job. And, I could have not that they fit in the book, but just as an example, like laser beams would not have been a good thing to write about because people don't know how laser beams work, or they're not really familiar with them. But a tracking watch, even if you don't wear a tracking watch, you kind of have the gist of what it is. So I was really, my instinct was always to make the technology feel as grounded as possible and as familiar as possible, because that was the only way to sort of give the reader an entry point to the story.
How about, there's some biological stuff, I guess is the only way I can put it. And I really don't want to spoil this. So if anybody has read the book and then comes back and finds this interview, address a little bit about some of the more natural elements that are futuristic. Is there research into some of that stuff?
That was actually that was based on an article, and apparently it was a real technology in Japan, and then it looks like it might have been a hoax. But I know that sounds really vague to anyone who hasn't read the book, but when they read the book, they'll understand it. And it was just like this little thing that kind of stuck with me, and I thought it was actually kind of like a late addition to the book. I was like, oh, it would be really funny to add this. I'm going to add this with the assumption that any reasonable editor is going to ask me to take it out. And then everyone just fucking loved it. They were like, this is a great detail. I'm like, fuck you all, you gross motherfuckers. but yeah, so I don't know. It's it's like I said, I read the news a lot, and that just popped up at one point, and I was like, yeah, that can go in.
That's awesome. And that's, so one thing I'll say about having read the book is that there were plenty of surprises and twists that I wasn't expecting, that being one of them. And so it was nice that you were hitting at a pretty good pace, like things that I just didn't expect at all, which has nothing to do with the question I'm about to ask. Cool. Which is so we talked a little bit about the research and the dedication and stuff like that, but is there anything about your inspiration for this book that doesn't have something to do with what we've already talked about? Like, was there any other thing that made you want to do this or made it come together the way it did?
Well, I mean, in a general sense, like I've always been kind of like an anti-establishment kind of person. So I feel like I was eventually going to get to this point. And even with my previous books, like, like The Bad Guys and the Woman from Prague, it's like a fucking bank is at the top of the food chain. And Potter's Fields, which is the last Ash book, like it deals with the heroin crisis, but I make sure to point out that the heroin crisis really needs to be laid at the foot of pharmaceutical companies. And, it was always kind of probably where I was going to end up, which was sort of doing like, speculative-y sort of, fuck large institutions kinds of books. But I can tell you the exact nexus point. There was an article that ran in Mother Jones in 2012 by Mac McClelland, and it was called "I Was a Warehouse Wage Slave." And she went and she got a job in a fulfillment center and just wrote about how shitty it was. And it wasn't just that it was shitty; it's that people were lined up around the corner for these jobs, because these companies are setting up in economically depressed areas where, they could basically do whatever the fuck they want because they're the only game in town. And I remember reading that article and being like, shit, there is a book here, and just filing it away. And it's the thing that I just, as I was writing the Ash books, I just kept on coming back to, and I would drop notes and links and articles and all this stuff in there. And I finally got to a point where, I had this real fear of writing it, because I was like, on one hand, I just don't know if I'm smart enough to write this. I don't know if I'm a good enough writer, because this is a really heavy subject. And the other part of me was like, if I don't do this now, someone else is going to get here. Like literally, like someone else is going to latch onto this idea, and then I'm going to be fucked. So I honestly, I think part of the success of this was the timing.
Yeah.
Speaking of timing, just want to get your take on something completely outside this book. So Amazon tried to move to New York recently. You are from New York.
They did.
There seems to be two mindsets. So there seems to be people in New York that are very happy that fell apart, and there seems to be people in New York who are really upset that it fell apart. Might we get your take on it?
Oh yeah, like I was munching on popcorn during that whole fucking thing. So that actually really gets to the root of what I think is the problem with the relationship between large corporations and government. because what happened was the mayor and the governor were basically like, Amazon, you can do literally anything you want. Like, you can urinate on our chests, and if you move here and create jobs. And that's, but that's Amazon's thing. That's every large corporation that's now building a headquarters. That's every fucking stadium. Like, stadiums are a good example of this, where they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna invigorate your neighborhood, and then they build like this giant luxury stadium, but make sure that it's completely walled off from the shitty communities that are surrounding it. I shouldn't say shitty communities. That's not fair, because those communities have been sort of driven into the ground by economic factors like billionaires making fucking lavish stadiums. But it's the governor and the mayor were offering all these givebacks to Amazon, and they were supposed to be creating X number of jobs, but there was a big question of what those jobs were, because they were trying to convince people like, oh yeah, Amazon's going to go into the local housing projects and hire the people who live there and teach them how to code and give them 6-figure jobs. And that's not what it was. There was a rush on real estate in Long Island City from people who worked at other Amazon facilities in other parts of the country. Like, they were just relocating staff there. They probably would have created some new jobs there too. But, they were doing it in a neighborhood where, our mass transit system is falling apart, and there were no guarantees that they were going to do anything to bolster that. It was just, it was stupid. And all it is so the mayor and the governor could be like, I created 125,000 jobs. Aren't I a fancy boy? Like, that's it. Like, that's the trade-off is, businesses come in, and they basically strip mine cities. We're not going to pay income tax. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And you're going to let us do it because we're going to let you parade around as job creators, and then you can get reelected. And it's very much a one hand washes the other kind of thing. And, Amazon is still actually scouting locations in New York City, because it was never about the givebacks. It was just about they don't like being told no.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely have a side. So it sounds like, yeah. I figured you might. It didn't occur to me until, we were talking about this, and I was like, wait a minute. A major company tried to open something up by you?
Yeah, man. God, that was a weird, and it was funny too, because this is getting really, really wonky, but the governor set it up in such a way that it would get around the normal land use process and around the city council, because the city council has to do an approval for the land rights stuff that they needed. So he did an end run around them. And then the Senate Democrats appointed this guy to there was this really obscure 3-person board on the state level that would yay or nay it. And so the Senate Democrats appointed someone who was against the project to kill it. So basically, they then did an end run around him. And so as a political junkie watching this, it was like my fucking dream. I was like, oh my God, the fucking gamesmanship here is incredible. And no one gives a shit about this except for me and all the other weird fucking political wonks in the city. But yeah, it was fun to watch.
So it's funny because watching that specifically play out, and I was very much a casual observer of the situation, is there's bidding wars from different cities, and it reminds me a lot of those temporary sports things like Olympics and stuff like that. And I can't remember the year. I think it was for Chicago was in the running for the Olympics one year, in the last decade or so. And I was living in the city at the time. I'm in the suburbs now. But at the time, I was like, man, I don't want the Olympics to come here, because you hear all these horror stories of how awful and devastating an Olympic hosting is to the city that's hosting it. And then these weird statistics like the occurrences of sex trafficking and stuff in major events like the Super Bowl or the Olympics and stuff just skyrocket. And it's why would anybody want this stuff in their community?
Yeah, and it so rarely pays off. It was God, I don't even remember who the fuck was in the last Super Bowl. But someone did an article about how the stadium that they played in was supposed to be this savior for the community, and it's done literally nothing for the community, because it's there's this idea that people are going to the stadium and then they're going to hang out and they're going to have dinner in the neighborhood, or they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And no, they're fucking not. They're going to drive to the stadium, go to the indoor parking garage, walk into the stadium, do all the shit they want to do, and immediately drive home.
Yep.
This is an issue that we deal with all the time on Staten Island, because Staten Island being sort of the least cool of the 5 boroughs, and it's this constant struggle. To sort, like, people are always like, oh, we have to market to people off of Staten Island. We have to get people who take the ferry for like the free ride to like get off the ferry and like come to our arts organizations, our restaurants. And it's like, it's never going to fucking happen. Like I'm dealing with this now because I'm trying next year to set up a book festival on the islands, because we don't have, like, we have one used bookstore and a Barnes and Noble. We don't really have a good indie, we don't have a big writing community, and me and some other writers are trying to build it up a little bit. And so we think a book festival would be a good sort of, starting ground for that. And one of the first conversations is they were like, oh, we have to get people from off the island. I'm like, no, we don't. We need to market to people on Staten Island and market this as a community thing. And if people want to come from off island, fucking great, but like the most important thing is our community. We shouldn't be trying to sell to people who are like, may or may not come. And, we're getting way off the rails right now.
Oh, this is all good stuff.
Yeah, but
yeah,
it's very close to the, I guess, the message of the book, and that's actually what's going to be the next question is, so there's some of the obvious stuff like the similarities to companies and stuff like that. If you could say, like, kind of what you hope people would get out of this book, what would you say that is?
I think that I would love it if people were a little bit more mindful about their economic impact. I think that there's an empathy gap in the economy where we've all sort of collectively decided that our comfort is worth someone else's discomfort. And I think a really good example of that is iPhones or smartphones in general. Like, even if we don't know the specifics, we all know, at least in broad strokes, that our phones were manufactured in facilities where the working conditions would be either inappropriate or outright illegal in the US. But we buy the phones anyway, because we don't have to look the villager from Shenzhen who's working a 12-hour day, 6 days a week around noxious chemicals in the eye. We can just get our phone and we can play Candy Crush on the subway and we can go on with our lives. And I was really hoping that people would kind of think a little bit about that. And the thing that has been really, really heartening to me is I've been reading my Goodreads reviews because we've just been going to, like, comic book conventions and stuff. And like, we've really been getting the galleys out there. I know you're not supposed to read them, but I've been reading them. And a lot of people have been saying, like, wow, like, this is making me rethink my economic footprint. And I'm like, fuck yeah. Like literally, that's all I could have hoped for. And like, people seem to be kind of keying into that. And I could not be happier.
So,
and I want to be clear about something too. I have an iPhone, so like, I'm not better than anyone. I've made that Faustian deal too for comfort, but maybe thinking about it is a good first step.
I think that's the key to what the book got me feeling is that, and I'm, I'm very aware of this in my day-to-day life because of where I work, which I won't say where I work. People just not taking the time to think kind of critically about the things that are happening around them. Because it's just effort, like, that they don't want to give. And I know I didn't say that very eloquently. You said it much better, but like, that's kind of one of the things that really came about for me was that, yeah, I'm the guy that sees the headline of an article and I figure, well, that's enough information. I don't read the article. And
yeah,
that kind of applies to what you're talking about as far as like consumerism and your economic footprint is like, it's the thing, it's cheap. I'm going to buy it. It's going to get delivered to me, and I'm not even going to consider the story behind that product or whatever it happens to be.
Which is kind of the key to it, right? Because, I can sit here for like the next hour and just like depress the shit out of you guys with like all these terrible facts and figures and like all these horrible anecdotes that I read. And you might get angry and anger is good, but, I think empathy is better. And I think a story sits with you differently than data does. So, the way I've been explaining it to people is that it's like when my daughter doesn't want to eat her broccoli, so I stick it in her mac and cheese, and we both win. she gets palatable meal, and she also gets her vitamins. And that's why I thought, let me do this. Let me do my fuck capitalism book, but sort of wrapped in the language of a thriller. And you're sort of there's almost kind of like a seduction to it, where it's like you're lulling the reader into a false sense of security, where it's like, hey, here's this fun, crazy story that you're going to enjoy, and then you get to the end and you're like, oh, by the way, everything is fucking terrible.
All right, let's transition slightly away from capitalism and talk about like the writing of the actual book. So
Yeah.
I want to commend you first, and then I'm going to have a little bit of a question.
Yeah. I'll take it.
I was fully prepared. So there are a lot of characters in this book. We do see 3 points of view, but there are, there's significantly more characters than that in the book. And I started it and I thought, okay, and this is just honest. Here we go. We have a clear villain, and then we have some heroes and whatever. But what I found fascinating, the more I read into the book, is that regardless, clearly we know which side you're on in this book, right? Like we just had this long conversation about it. How relatable you made all the characters. So you could have done this in a way in which a lot of fiction writers do, where this is the big bad. This person is a good person through and through, and this person is a good person through and through. Your characters were really conflicted. They all had a point of view that was, reasonable, even if it was wrong. Like you did a really great job kind of expressing the character motivations in a way that didn't just paint them black and white. So I guess my question to that is, how much conscious effort did you put into that? Or did you just naturally write characters that were flawed and super relatable? So here's what I'll say. From this conversation, I think anybody could think Gibson is clear. He's the founder and CEO of Cloud, right?
Yeah.
That he's a really just a big bad guy, right? But you made him fairly relatable. Like his explanations for how he got to where he is and the decisions he makes, I felt were something that a person would think, and made him, you could have very easily just made him the supervillain of the book. And I guess what I'm saying is it didn't feel like you did. Like you did a good job showing his growth into what it is. And I get the feeling that probably took a little bit of work for you, especially after this conversation that we've had about mega corporations and who would run something like that.
Well, so the funny thing about all that is that I knew Paxton and Zinnia I had really early on. Like they were right there at the beginning. I knew that I wanted to have one character who was going to be sort of like a company man who was kind of aggrieved, but also was like one of those people who just, toes the line and could be sort of gaslighted into buying the company Kool-Aid and all that stuff. And I knew that I wanted to have one character be a little bit more cutting and a little bit more able to see through the bullshit. And so that just felt like a strong balance for me, where I could play these two characters off each other, where one is the company man and one is the outsider, and it just was not working. Like it didn't feel. It felt like it needed to be bigger than that, and what I finally came around to understanding was that Cloud is so big that it's practically a character, and because it was practically a character, it needed someone to represent it. So why not just add the CEO into the mix? And so it was a function of like he's explaining he's basically litigating his legacy in blog posts as the story goes on, and until we finally meet him in person. But I really needed his voice in there. And once I clicked with that voice, and once I heard it, and once I put it into the book, I was like, fuck, the entire thing made sense to me. And this is where we get into like that weird fugue state of writing a novel, where it's like, I wish I had some kind of like actionable explanation for it. But it's just like, it felt like once I had his voice in the mix, the whole thing just like, I mean, I wrote the book in like, I wrote the first section over the course of like a couple of months, and then I wrote the rest of the book in like 6 months. Like the whole thing just really clicked for me. And, I think there's a degree to which the three characters are they really are like three elements of my personality. I think Zinnia is closest to my voice in the sense that she's an acerbic dickhead. And she's kind of an asshole, and that's sort of my wheelhouse. But, Paxton is the part of me that, can be afraid and can sometimes be the yes man and can sometimes, make excuses for bad situations because it's comfortable or it's easy. And, with Gibson, it was sort of there's a single sentence he says in the book that really that his entire character just hangs on like a portrait. And so I'm not going to say what it is, but it was tapping into my own feelings of confidence and sort of look. Obviously, the game changed after the book sold because it sold at a level I never thought it would. But there have certainly been points in my life where I'm like, yeah, I'm good at what I do. I'm a hard worker. I accomplish things, and those moments were sometimes fleeting. But it was kind of trying to key into that feeling of being like, I mean, also like I'm a white straight dude with all my hair, so I'm already pretty privileged as it is. But yeah, it was finding that thread of sort of confidence that is not always easy for writers to come by, but we all have it to a degree, like ego, basically. Like I was tapping into my ego and trying to figure out what that would look like, because Gibson's like the best villains really are the ones who don't believe they're villains. He believes he's a hero, and so that's a much more interesting dynamic than some guy who knows that he's doing shitty things.
Yeah, I think that that was one of the things. As I started reading it, I was texting with friends who are aware of the book and wanted to know like my feelings on it and stuff, and that was one of the things that I was explaining, besides like the basic how I thought the mechanics of a story were going, was that like that level of nuance and like Livius was saying. So yeah, I agree. I think that went very well. One thing that the book really made me feel, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, with the way that you wrote kind of like the day-to-day life of being in one of these mother cloud kind of locations, was that I really started to feel that kind of pressure of being a worker there. So I felt like I was very much in the position of someone who was working in this place and starting to feel the negative effects that you talked about with like the dedication and everything. So was that intentional, or was I just really just getting into it?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, that's, and it goes back to the empathy thing, like the whole point of it was that I wanted people to sort of get that sense of, and again, it's sort of like a fantastical version of a fulfillment center, but at the end of the day, it's a fulfillment center. And how it kind of sucks to have this quota that's impossible to meet, this monotonous job where it's just you spend hours and hours at a time just like picking shit off shelves and putting them on conveyor belts, and then your break finally arrives and it's like, oh great, like I'm a fucking mile and a half from the break room, I can't even eat my lunch.
Right.
I think that's even if you don't work in a fulfillment center, even if you don't do physical labor, I think that we can all sort of understand the feeling of our jobs wanting so much of us. Like I have friends who are afraid to take their vacation time because they feel like they're not going to look properly dedicated. And, there's this expectation now that we're supposed to check our email on nights and weekends when, fuck that. That's supposed to be time for us. But we're sort of gaslighted into this idea of well, at least you have a job, like even if your job sucks, at least you're getting a paycheck.
Right.
And it's like, why should we be happy about having a job if the job is shitty? And what I was hoping was that even if people didn't necessarily have that feeling, like even if people didn't have that direct correlation of like, I've done that job, they can at least find things that were familiar, and they could be like, I may not do that job, but I know what that feels like.
Very briefly, very briefly, for one shift, 20-ish years ago, I worked for a temp company, and they sent me to a job at Motorola making phones.
Okay.
So I sat, they took me to one place. Like the very first thing they did, they were like, put the sticker on all the phones that get shoved to you in these bins. So for like an hour, I'm literally just placing a sticker on a phone. And then they're like, we're going to show you how to assemble the antenna. So for like an hour, I put this is when antennas would come up on phones when you'd have to raise them,
Yeah, the TikTok generation has no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah,
right
exactly. Now. So I did probably like 6 different positions over the whatever was like a 9-hour shift. And I thought, like, I was convincing myself, like, okay, like the money is okay, and I could do this or whatever. And I'm with the lady who's kind of been showing me how to do these things and checking in on me. She says, hey, how would you think of tonight? And I go, well, it was okay. I thought it was really mundane, but I was like, all right, I broke it up into chunks. She goes, oh yeah. She goes, tonight was actually pretty hectic. Normally we have you at the same station for 3 months at a time. And that was it. I was done. This was a job. It was second shift. It was midnight. I called the temp agency and said, hey, I'm not going back there tomorrow. Like, let me know when I can pick up my check for this job. And there's a thing there, man. Like I tried to convince myself it was the right thing. And then I just pictured myself just installing that same antenna for 8.5 hours a night, like how it just wasn't doable. And there are jobs out there like that. I mean, I know there's less and less with automation, but that's somebody's reality. Like there are people who work there that I'm sure had worked there for years doing the same thing over and over and over again. So I can see how that literally winds up killing you slowly.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a degree to where it's like not everyone's job can be as fucking exciting, glamorous as writing novels, but because someone somewhere has to clean out the porta potties at I can't even think of a good music festival. This fucking analogy fell apart on me. But
Lollapalooza is happening last weekend in Chicago. So.
There we go. Cool. Lollapalooza. But yeah, like not everyone's job can be exciting, but it's also like, there's this, I don't know. I think we kind of like overconsume goods and we sort of, I've been thinking a lot about my own consumption and a couple of times now I've gone to buy something and I'm like, I don't need this. I'm just not going to get it because there's just going to be another fucking thing that's in my house that's going to take up space. And one day I'm going to die and someone's going to have to like throw out and it's just not worth it. And, yeah, I think it's easy to sort of, again, like, you didn't work in a fulfillment center, but you worked in a similar kind of environment. So you were able to make that connection.
I just want to put it out there that, I don't find writing a novel to be exotic. It would be very, that would be a nightmare for me. So.
Oh God. Yeah, no, I was being facetious.
I know. I'm just,
it's the worst job ever. Well, because
it sounds terrible.
Well, no, here's the funniest thing about this entire all the fucking lunacy around the warehouse is that I really thought it was the worst fucking thing I'd ever written. I was in Singapore when I finished the novel. My wife was getting a master's and they were doing a study abroad thing, and they had a really generous partner rate where I can pay to come out with the class and like be on the plane and like go like get myself in trouble while she was doing school stuff. And so and I don't really sleep well on planes anyway, so I was getting near the end of the book. I'm like, this is perfect. I'm gonna have like 17 hours of fucking flight time and then I'm gonna have a couple of days to myself. So I just edited like crazy on the plane, got in Singapore, first day, like took my laptop, went down to Chinatown and just wandered around and like stop in a cafe or stop in a bar. And I finally finished the book and I sent it to my agent and with an apology. And I was like, this is a fucking mess. I don't get it. I don't think it works. And he had been saying like, send me pages. And I'm like, at this point, like I just need an outside opinion because I'm past the point of being able to objectively look at this. And he writes me back and he's like, I have notes for you, but this is like the least amount of notes that I've ever asked of anybody. And so my first thought was, and it's a really ungenerous thought because it's not true, but I was like, shit, do I have a bad agent? Because this was the first thing that we were working on together. And I was like, does he have no notes because he has no editorial insight? And he ended up, the notes he gave me were very, very good and very insightful and definitely made the book better. And then we submitted the book. I'm like, well, no one's going to buy it. And then, yeah, we almost go to auction. And then I was like, well, it's not going to sell outside the United States because it's too American. And then like we sold in like 20 something countries. And so like the whole thing was just a progressive series of like ever absurd dominoes.
Dude, I have not seen an Amazon locker in the United States, but I totally saw one in Paris. So I think they probably get it in other places too.
Yeah, no, I mean, and some of the countries they're going nuts for it. I mean, I'm going like Germany. Jesus, Germany made a fucking hardcover galley. The galley is a hardcover. And not only that, it's over 500 pages because so there's a lot of short chapters in the book, and there's a lot of like jumping between perspectives. So like, and you know, you guys probably saw like the chapters kind of run together, whereas in the German edition they did page breaks. So like starting on a new page for each chapter, which added like another 200 pages to the book. And and it's like, yeah, and the pages are like tipped, like they're dyed red, and it's like, man, it's just it's a piece of fucking art. Like they sent it to me, and I just sat there with it for a couple of minutes. Like, I can't believe someone fucking made this out of a thing that I wrote, you know. And the UK next week, like they're going nuts over it. Like they said like I'm one of the lead books for the year, and I'm like, okay, guys, thanks, no pressure.
I mean, it would be really funny if this was your greatest commercial success, the book questioning capitalism, right?
Hey, you know, I'll take it. And it's also at the same time too, like I feel like if this is my wheelhouse now, like, and it's just about me writing like thrillers that like take apart like, you know, large institutions, I am fucking there for that shit. You know, like the one I'm working on now is very anti-government. That's my next target. So we'll see if I can actually make lightning strike twice.
You've touched on some of this already, but tell us about some of the you know, the biggest differences in transitioning to such a large publisher. Your previous novels were all kind of done on a smaller scale, with the exception of your Patterson co-authored book. So what was the biggest, I guess, change for you going from where you were publishing to where the warehouse is?
It was really, it's having a team. You know, I have 4 people. Well, I've got my editor, you know, and his assistant who's very hands-on, and she's fucking brilliant. But then I've got 4 people at Crown who are my PR and marketing team. And, you know, all the shit that I used to do myself, they do, you know, and there are times where I almost feel bad because like just recently we put together like a street team, and we're like, you know, we sent some swag and some copies of the book out to people, and you know, and so Kathleen, who's like my point of contact on that, like she's like, I was like, okay, I'll do this, and she's like, no, that's my job, I'll do all that. And I'm like, are you sure? She's like, yeah, like it's literally my job. And I'm like, holy fuck, you know. And it's and look, you know, my previous publisher, Polis, you know, they did a lot of good work for me, but at the end of the day, it's a one-man show, and Jason Pinter works really hard, and he gets a lot more than most small publishers do. But you're also sort of limited just from a manpower perspective, because there's only so many hours in a day. And so having this team of people that's so completely dedicated to the book, and like I feel fucking pampered. It's ridiculous. Like I went to so they brought me out to San Diego Comic-Con to do like some panels and some signings and stuff, and it's like they're paying freight for it, and I get there and they're like, here's your itinerary, and then we're taking all the sci-fi authors from Random House out to dinner at this restaurant. I'm like, fucking Christ, guys, this is so cool, you know. But I will say, I went to London already. I had planned to go out to visit some friends in Glasgow, and it was around the time that the British publisher was printing galleys, and they were like, well, why don't we'll put you on a train to London, you can come down for the day, we'll send you home through Heathrow, and we'll go to bookstores one day, and we'll just hand out galleys to bookstore owners, which is a great idea. And I was like, yes, I will absolutely do that. And so I spent the day, and it was a beautiful day. It was like, I think end of February, beginning of March, but it was like a nice, like sunny, like kind of warm day in London. And I was teamed up with this guy from the publisher, this nice guy Tom, and we went to like 9 bookstores all over the city, and just like we're shaking hands and like hanging out with people, and everyone was really fucking nice. And they take me out to dinner at the end of the night, and it's really fun because it's all the people who are working on the book, and they love the book so much. And like my British sub-rights agent is there, and we had a blast. And at the end of the night, like my hotel was like a mile and a half away, and I'm a New Yorker. Anything under 3 miles to me is walking distance. And I wasn't too drunk, and it was a nice. I'm like, I'm gonna walk back to the hotel. They were like, no, we'll stick you in a car. I'm like, no, I would really like to walk. It's a good night. I'm in a city I don't get to visit a lot. I want to walk back. And as I was walking back, like it was one of those moments when this whole thing kind of sunk in with me, and I got kind of emotional because it was like, fuck, like there are so many people who are like pulling for me and for this book, and who are putting themselves out there right now, and it's just, it's such an incredible feeling. I feel so fucking lucky.
I wouldn't walk 3 miles, I'm going to say. I live in the suburbs. We drive everywhere.
Well, it's also like I was eating so much food that I kind of needed to counteract it a little bit.
So outside of the publishing, the actual print book of things, there was discussion of like the movie side of things. So is there anything exciting to talk about with that?
There's some exciting things happening, not all of which I'm sure I can discuss yet. So yeah, Ron Howard bought the film rights, or optioned it, and which it's an option. It may or may not happen. That's just the way these things go. But when I was in San Diego for Comic-Con, they were like, "Oh, cool! Like, do you want to come up to LA and like sit down with us?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah, that'd be fun." Not really thinking that it would be insane to drive from San Diego to LA back to San Diego, because what happened was I had a panel on the Friday that I was there. I had a panel at 5 p.m., but I had nothing else during the day. So I was like, "Oh, cool! I'll wake up in the morning. I'll drive up. I'll meet with them. I'll drive back to San Diego." And then it kind of sunk in how crazy it was to do that. So I ended up, it was 3 hours up and 4 hours down. And by that, I really felt that 7th hour in the car. It was a lot. But and Ron Howard wasn't actually there. He's finishing a movie in Georgia right now. But I sat down with my point of contact, this really great girl, Katie, and a couple of other people, and and it was just a really great conversation, because I think, any reasonable person has to go into a situation like this, with a big fucking boulder assault under their arm, because, Hollywood is Hollywood. But I got a really nice vibe off them. They were sort of running me through some of the things that they would want to change, as they were writing the screenplay. And they were all like really smart changes. They were really sort of just looking to expand on the world a little bit and expand on the characters a little, and it was nothing that was really offensive to me. And they also, they asked me if I had any hills that I wanted to die on, and I told them what my one hill was, which I'm not going to say here, but they were really receptive to that, and that made me feel good too. Because in one of the first conversations I had with them, I'm like, "Look, I'm a naturally curious person. I am interested to learn new things. I'm interested to see new things. I'm interested to be as involved as you feel comfortable with me being involved. But at the same time, I also understand that, you optioned it, you're handling the screenplay, you're handling all that stuff. So if at any point you feel like I'm being a pain in the ass, just tell me to go sit in the corner and fold my hands, and I'll do that, because it's not my job to tell you how to do your job." And they were like, we actually want you to feel satisfied by this. We want you to feel like you're a part of this process. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And that's how I felt so far. Like, they've been super nice and responsive. I mean,
awesome.
Just the fact that they return my emails is pretty cool. So, so yeah, it's one of those things that, if nothing else happens, if it completely stalls out where it is right now, I mean, my stock rating went through the roof for a little while, and it got me some more attention, and that's never a bad thing.
Nice.
Hey, before we let you go, is there anything else you want to talk about, or anything you want to mention that maybe we didn't cover?
I don't know. Tell me how you guys are doing.
We're doing.
I've been talking about me this whole time. It's so fucking selfish.
We're doing pretty good. See, that's how we feel, though. Like, when a publisher responds to an email, is a little bit like you do. Like, we send an email, and then like books show up, and we're like, "This is the best. Yeah. This is the best thing ever." So,
yeah. So sometimes magic does happen.
Yep.
I will say we have been busy this year, my friend.
Yeah, you have.
Just things are like, but it's due to the fact that like you guys are putting out stuff for us to read. So like it's just like, in the past years it's been like a slog to be like, oh, what can we read? But like it seems like this year there was a serious uptick in like the people that we know, but also the people that we're discovering that are brand new, just putting out incredible stuff. So I don't know if it's just that the stars are aligning and we're finding all these good things, or if there's like more stuff, or the publishers are taking more risks or something, but it just feels like there's a momentum building, and that's always great.
No, I totally feel you on that, because I just recently was thinking like there are too many fucking books for me to read. Like I've really been I've been struggling to keep up because it's like, you know, you end up with like a couple of piles. There's the people who are looking for blurbs and you have to try to get to those in some reasonable fashion because they're waiting. And there's the people who you have to read because it a little bit feels like homework because like they're a really good friend or you feel like you have to read it because it's from your publisher, it's in the same genre. And then there's the books that you want to read that it's just your buds that, like they're your friends and you want to support them. Yep. And then there's the pile of just like everything else. And I feel like those buddy piles are just getting bigger and bigger, and it's not the worst problem to have, but there are certainly times where it's like I've gone on like really hardcore binges where I'm tearing through like a couple of books in like 2 or 3 weeks, and then I like end up taking a little bit of a break because I feel kind of burnt out. I didn't get a chance to listen to the Wanderers episode that you guys did, but where did you guys land on that book?
It was mixed. So I will honestly say that it's kind of weird. So here's the thing. Of the stuff that we've reviewed for Wendig, his Miriam Black books were very much their own thing. So it's difficult to kind of weigh them against Wanderers because it was obviously two very different kind of goals. But I feel like it's definitely a different step for him. And I enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, but it was mixed.
Well, Livius had some other...
It was a little mixed. let's go that route. It's a little bit what I was alluding to earlier with your characters being a little well-rounded, where I think maybe some other authors, not necessarily Chuck Wendig, kind of go super black and white. Like, you know who the hero is and they're infallible, and you know who the villains are because they all have villain sign on their head. And that's one of the things, like I said, that I really appreciated about The Warehouse was that everybody had a side, and those sides, even if it's just to them, were legitimate, but you could feel it reading even going into it. And I felt like Wanderers really painted everybody black and white. These are your heroes, these are your villains. There's no in between. Have at it. And that made it less enjoyable for me.
That's interesting. I mean, and I'm not going to reject that standpoint because I think it's a legitimate criticism. I think from a mechanical standpoint, I kind of understand when you're dealing with such a sprawling cast and such a big book, because that was a big fucking book.
Yeah.
I think sometimes your strokes have to be a little bit more defined, just to sort of keep people from spinning too far out of control, because there might be a point where it's just like there's too much to follow. I really dug it. I had meant to listen to the episode and then just got jammed up on a few things. So, but I was curious to see where you guys landed because, I was really surprised that it was like it was an 800 fucking page book that I read in 3 days. Like I just could not put it down.
Yeah. Well, so it actually caused me to go back and listen to our review of his book Zeros, which handles some similar topics. It's I don't know if you read it, but like,
yeah,
it's a bunch of hackers gathered together to kind of like, and then there's like an AI involved and everything. And our review of that was much more enthusiastic. And so there's something different with this one where I think that for Livius, my overall impression was that like it was kind of message heavy and to be blunt, a little preachy. I was very enthusiastic about it and I liked it. I just thought I was going to like it more, which is interesting. And this is nothing against Chuck. I thought it was very well done, and I doubt that there's many people that could do what he did. But yeah, like re-listening to our review of Zeros made me realize, like, there's something that was a little bit off for this one for me.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah. But not in like a negative way, just in like it's different.
Yeah, I almost came from because I really like Zeros a lot. Zeros was actually one of the books that made me want to sort of like dream a little bigger and sort of play in like this sort of sci-fi speculative space. But I like Wanderers just knocked me the fuck out. Like I loved it. I'm trying to get my wife to read it now. She's a voracious reader. Like she reads more than I do. But she also has like her own list of people that she's trying to get through. And it's also like you look at Wanderers and you're like, this is a fucking brick of a book. But I remember like sitting down with the galley and I'm like, man, this is going to be a tough one. And then like a few hours later, I'm like, shit, I'm still reading.
So was there like if you loved it, so what was like, what are the standout, like if you're pitching it to someone, what is it, that you're telling them that was so exciting about it?
The thing that really amazed me is that it's like it felt very contemporary in the sense that it felt like it took like every little scary thing that like every scary headline that you read on Twitter and somehow took them all and mashed them all up and made them into a coherent narrative, which I think like felt a little bit like magic to me. It is a message book. It is a book that has a very strong political viewpoint, and but I also think it's a good political viewpoint. I tend to I like that it really villainized the sort of right-wing militia fucking asshole pretend army man scumbags. Like I'm okay with them being. It's something I'm struggling with on the next book because some of the targets I'm going after. Yeah, you guys aren't the first to say it. Like everyone, like my editor loved that Gibson had so many shades of gray. A lot of people really responded to that, and now I'm dealing with some people that I'm like, these people don't have fucking shades of gray to me. Like I can't write them in the kind of way that I did him because it's like I can't find that sort of justifying angle, and
Yeah.
and so I feel a little bit of pressure because I feel like I did something very, very right with Gibson, and so I feel sort of compelled to replicate it, at least to a degree that is going to keep a reader engaged in the story. But at the same time, maybe that's not what I should be doing. I don't know. I'm in a weird headspace right now on the next book, but yeah, no, yeah, I just I thought it was I think it took a lot of it took a lot of the fears and the frustrations and the anxieties of the current news cycle and made them into a really sort of uniquely weirdly current narrative that was built around this like the way it sort of built up this mystery of like you've got these sleepwalkers and why are they sleepwalking and why are they acting so fucking weird and why can't you pierce their skin with needles, and sort of like draws you, like it kind of like grabs you by the collar and pulls you through that weird mystery. And yeah, I just really dug it.
Well, and one of the things I said in the review is that first chapter, when I read the first chapter, I was like, this is like the best short story I've read in a long time, because it does such a great job of like setting the stage and sucking you in. So yeah, there's definitely some really great moments for it.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts I'll share with you when we're not like, we'll talk offline, because I had a thought about the ending that I'd like to see what you think about.
Okay. Are you guys open to recommendations?
We are always open.
Always.
Okay. Yeah, it's a book that came out earlier this year, American Spy by Lauren Wilkinson. I fucking loved it. Holy shit, I love that fucking book. Like it's about a black woman in the 1980s working for the CIA who gets enlisted as a spy, and so it's very relevant in the sense that it's dealing with issues of racism and sexism, but it's also this really great political story, but it's also this really incredible story about a mom and her kids. And I was reading it when I was in Glasgow and London, and I was finishing the book on the train ride down, which is like a 5-hour train ride. And I by the end of the book, I was getting like really worked up and emotional to the point where the conductor was like walking down, and I was like the only one on the car. So I guess it just stood out more. But he kind of stops and looks at me. He's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "This is a really good book." But I just and it's like her debut novel, and it's just like fuck if like it's I think it's up at the level of Le Carré, which for when you're getting into like the realm of like political and espionage, like that's no fucking joke. So I would say like if you guys are ever in a place where you feel like you've got some space to fill, that is a very worthy addition.
I just pulled it up on Amazon so I can remember to look at it.
Yeah.
Later. So that Rob could continue to support our overlords.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that I wasn't aware of, so it's never occurred to me that as a podcast we should go to a Comic-Con. But that few days that you were there, I was like, oh, Rob Hart's there, and Mark Danielewski's there, and S.G. Brown is there. And I'm like, none of these are comic books. Why aren't we thinking about going to a Comic-Con? because that's 3 authors that I really like and respect and would like to hang out with.
It's interesting because the thing about the cons is that they're such a fucking crush. I mean, I did Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle, and that was a little bit more chill. And there was, like there was one bar that most people hung out at. So like AWP. So it was a little bit smaller scale. San Diego Comic Con is just fucking lunacy. It's like, it's such a crush of people. There's, you have to pick like 2 or 3 things to do because you have to stand online all fucking day. And there are so many people that I know who were there and I just never saw because you're constantly running around and there's constantly shit happening. And, I don't know. I feel like it would be interesting for you guys to go to a con, I guess, because then you can do some cool, like, man on the street shit, pull some people aside for like, a 10 to 15 minute chat. And yeah, you might get access to some really cool people that way. But also I've kind of found that some of the really cool people, like they really only poke their heads up a little bit and then they disappear back into whatever fucking weird fantasy realm that they live in. So sometimes it's just hard to peg people down. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it might be worth exploring.
So Livius was all excited because he saw these people, and then I don't know if it was you or someone else that posted just a picture of the floor on one day, and it was just bodies. It was just nothing but like just a swarm of people, and I was like, this is why we're not doing that.
It's like being in Times Square and you can't fucking leave. It's like it was like there was the last day of the conference. I realized like shit, I have to get something for my daughter, and I just needed to find like a toy for her, and it was like fuck, like it was like Dante's Inferno. Like, I think I descended through all 7 levels of hell. Like, I was trying to just find, and I ended up finding like this weird little fucking unicorn thing. And thank God she likes it. She really likes unicorns. But it's like, man, I was getting scared. I was like, someone might need to airlift me out of here.
I feel like I saw an article one time, and this might be, forgive me if this was a hoax or not a hoax, but like, whatever, not true. But I feel like I saw an article one time about specifically San Diego Comic-Con where it was talking about there was a problem with not having enough oxygen because of all of the people. And like there was like problems with like carbon monoxide levels and stuff because of just like the press of bodies and the space that they were in and everything. So
holy shit.
Like that article. Yeah. So hopefully
I would not be surprised.
Not something that,
like that.
Yeah. Because it sounds like it could happen. So.
Well, it's also like, everyone kept on telling me like it's too many people, it's crazy. Because at one point I was like, oh, maybe I should bring my daughter, and everyone was like, no, do not do that. That would be insane. And I'm like, everyone's just being dumb, everyone's being silly. And then I got there, I'm like, oh my god, they were right. Like I showed up and I was like, oh cool, like maybe I'll go to the because I'm a Marvel junkie, and I'm like, cool, maybe I'll go to the big Saturday Marvel panel where they announce all their cool shit. And I got in on a Thursday, and my PR person was like, no, there are people already camped out for that. And I'm like, all right then, hard pass. Not doing that shit.
Like 70% of like the like movie news and TV show news that's anything, and it's no longer just science fiction, like horror stuff comes out of there. I mean, it's probably the biggest, like, how do I say this, like non-literary event of the year, right? So it covers all the other non-dramatic genres, maybe, and all of it comes.
Yeah, to a large degree, it's not a Comic-Con anymore; it's a pop culture convention, and but it's also, it's a really good hit for authors, especially authors who are playing in like sort of like the speculative sci-fi space, because like when I was there, Wendig was there, and Delilah Dawson was there, and Pierce Brown, and Paul Kruger, and all these authors who were sort of, writing that kind of stuff, and they were all getting great receptions. And, I had, granted, like I didn't have a book out, like we were giving away the galley, so people didn't really have the same level of recognition for me. But, people were still lining up for the galley because it's free shit. And but then they would by the time they got to me for the signing, they'd be like, oh, wow, I read the description of this. This sounds really fucking cool. So we were clearly sort of like hitting the wheelhouse of the people who were there. So it was, and I, again, like reading the Goodreads reviews, like they tick up as soon as we come back from the conventions. Like people are reading the book and then they're writing about the book and then they're posting it on Instagram and they're telling their friends. And it's a super effective way to reach people.
Stop reading the reviews, Rob. Stop reading the
Yeah,
reviews.
I know I shouldn't do that. I know.
I guess that, you know what? You just made me think of something that we didn't talk about at all. Like, because you were talking about your team that was promoting and stuff, but like, you had a really cool opportunity to do cool promotional swag. Like, I saw you had like a lanyard, and even in the galley that was sent to me, there was like the booklet that was like the employee orientation thing.
Yeah, the brochure.
Yeah, so I have to say that like, great job on the promotional push as far as like that like material stuff was, and then like there was the images and stuff that you were posting on social media too that were like slogans from the company. I feel like that push was really good.
Yeah, they put together some really cool stuff for this, and the brochure was really funny because so I had a hard time visualizing the facility, and I ended up drawing a map, like literally, like got a big piece of like poster board and just drew it out. And when I mentioned this, my UK publisher Transworld is an imprint of Penguin Random House, as is Crown, and Transworld and Crown are very buddy. That's part of the reason that I went with Transworld, because we were at auction with a bunch of UK publishers, and it was like they seemed like they would work hand in hand very well with Crown. So when I was out there, I mentioned the map, and they were like, "Fuck, can you send it to us?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I sent them a picture, and they were like, "Can we like do our own version, like make this look?" They didn't say make it look not bad, but that's what they did. They made it look not bad, and they were like, "Because maybe we'll do a brochure or something." I'm like, "Fuck yeah!" And then Crown was like, "Yeah, like we'll get in on that, and we'll help produce it, and we'll help print copies." And so I sent them the map, and they put it together, and it looked great. And then they were like, we need a little bit more material for this. It would be really cool if you had like a manual for how the watches worked. And I'm like, see, funny story. I had an interstitial chapter about the watches that I took out because it just felt like there was one too many of those. Because like there's like how the payment system works, and there are some scripts of like videos and stuff, like those little like in between chapters. And so we agreed to take this one out. So when they asked for it, I'm like, cool, like now I actually get to use it. And so yeah, it came together really nicely. And then the social media cards they did a bang up job on. And yeah, it's like, I always tried to think creatively with the Ash books, and always tried to think of like cool promo ideas. And it's like, these folks are like 10 steps ahead of me. They the fucking UK publisher made T-shirts with the cloud logo on it, and like they designed a logo, and like they sent me some of the T-shirts, so I wore one at Comic-Con because I was like, fuck, I can cosplay as one of the characters from my book. It's just ridiculous.
Which means you were a security guard, right?
Yeah, I've got a red one too, but yeah, I just bought the blue one for that time.
Yeah, it was really cool.
All right, we'll wrap it up. We know you're heading out on tour. Congratulations on the book, and best of success to you. And don't be a stranger. Let us know next time you want to chit chat.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me.
Once again, awesome to have Rob on. We're going through this thing right now, man, where we're getting all these people on, and we're like, why did it take so long in between interviews? So I think we really need to kind of look at our model and see how we can keep the relationships a little fresher.
Yeah, a great conversation. I'll be honest, we went some places I didn't think we were going to go, places we don't normally go with like an author.
Like when he asked us, what's up with us?
Yeah, it was a little confusing. Hey, we ask questions around here, buddy. But Rob's a great guy. It was a great conversation. And yeah, for sure, more interviews, more Rob Hart, which oddly enough, I'll segue into next week. We're doing The Warehouse. The following week, we're going to be doing a short story collection.
Much to Livius' chagrin, yeah.
There aren't a lot of things that would get me into doing a short story collection. This is an anthology. I shouldn't even say collection. This is an actual anthology. But David James Keaton, who we also haven't had on in forever, has put together, God damn it, Tales from the Crust, an anthology of pizza horror. Let me say that again in case you missed that. Tales from the Crust, an anthology of pizza horror.
See, now that, yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
yeah,
wasn't there, so there's a saying this goes against the saying that, like, what is it? Like, pizza is like sex. Like, even bad pizza is still good or something like that. Or is it sex is like pizza? Either way.
It's something like that, yeah.
Maybe their next anthology could be like sex horror, and then they could play on that whole like saying. I don't know. I got nothing, man.
It's I mean, I'm sure sex horror has been done before.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think pizza horror has. I don't know that I'm going to look into this a lot, but that is edited by David James Keaton and Max Booth III. And the reason I kind of segued into that is that there's a story from Rob Hart in there. So it's like Rob Hart month.
Oh, yeah. He did that. I wonder if, because he did that collection of short stories of his own called Takeout. I wonder if there's any crossover. Like, was he just in a food mood when he was writing these stories? Or?
I'm not sure, but why don't you read that book too before, and then you can let me know.
I'm going to pass on that. I'm taking my foot off the gas a little on the reading for at least a couple weeks. So.
Yeah, I thought I was going to do that, and then I read a 650-page book since I read The Warehouse.
Dude,
so
seriously.
Angel's Game, guys, I'm telling you. What's his name? Is it Carlos Ruiz Zafón?
It is. I'm happy that I finally introduced you to books that you not only like, but really like.
Fucking love, dude. That guy is something else, man.
Because I had a track record at the beginning where I was just recommending stuff that nobody liked. So,
you know
8 years later,
you figured it out. It takes a little while. Yeah. So that's the next couple of weeks in a nutshell for you. So thanks for listening to this interview episode of with Rob Hart. Go pre-order a copy of The Warehouse. Minor spoiler alert. You didn't get it from the interview. We kind of like this book. So I think it's going to have a very favorable review next week. So pre-order your copy so you can get it next week. And then go pick up a copy of Tales from the Crust, an anthology of pizza horror. I don't even know what to say about this, man.
Well, you'll be seeing a lot 2 weeks from now.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Livius Nudden.
And I'm Rob Olson. Keep eating pizza and stuff, I guess. I don't know.